What we do know is has come through official Puntland reporting, and we also have some official statement from the federal government. But what we do know from the Puntland government is that on the 18th of July, they sighted a ship, the MVC World, very close to their coast in an area called Barredo. This ship was idling there for 2 days. They suspected that there was something afoul with it, especially as it was in an area that was under surveillance because of ISIS shipments. ISIS is a terror group that is currently operating in that area of Somalia, and that the Puntland government has been fighting for the past couple of months, or I would say up to 6 months. So because of that, they were highly suspicious, and they decided to go check on it and sent forces to board the ship. And when they did even come close to it, they noticed that there was military-graded vehicles aboard it. And so they went on board and they intercepted it and asked it to dock at Bosaso.
And do we know what kind of equipment specifically was on board? And who owns this Comoros flagged carrier?
It's a businessman that has rented it out. The crew are from Eastern Europe, and they don't have any proper documentation as of now. According to the Puntland authorities that I've spoken to, there is no clear bill of lading of where this equipment was going and who it belongs to. But what they did find on board is about 36 armored personnel carriers. There was ambulances, there was a fire truck, and then in terms of equipment, there was some anti-aircraft guns. There was around 2,100 pistols and around 3 tons of ammunition.
And what's been done to the contents therein?
They've been seized, and what Puntland mentioned, they have done 2 statements on this, but on the initial statement, they said they're conducting investigations as to where, this ship was coming from and where it was heading, and are requesting anyone with any information to come forth. I think they did a second statement right after the federal government accused them of seizing it illegally in the seas, and they stated that they're welcoming both the Turkish and the federal government to come to Puntland and inspect and participate in the investigation, because they say the facts are still not clear. What I do understand from officials in Puntland is that they did have some informal conversations with the Turkish embassy in Mogadishu, and in those conversations they requested any formal documentation confirming that this equipment belonged to the Turks, and that formal communication has not been forthcoming for the past almost 10 days.
Are there concerns about who's allowed to ship arms into Somalia, especially given the country's history with arms embargoes?
I truly believe that before the lifting of the arms embargo, some of these issues should have been clarified in formal policies and in documents, but none of this was ever clarified. You know that Somalia has been in conflict for over 30 years, and because of that conflict, we do have regional states, some of which do not have any relationship with the federal government. For instance, Somaliland, which is considered still a part of Somalia, but has declared independence since 1991. Then you do have Puntland that has over a year now declared, that it's cut off its relations with the federal government. And then you have Jubaland, which is also having testy relationships with the federal government at the moment. But there is 3 other federal member states that have a good relationship with the center. So in the lifting of the arms embargo, it was never clarified who has final authority over importing, what the communication line is, if the federal member states need to import equipment for their fight against ISIS or fight against Al-Shabaab, how do they proceed, what are the formal mechanisms. So because that has never been clarified, there's really no way to say, this equipment is destined for so-and-so.
Somalia's federal government has accused Puntland of what it calls acts of piracy. That indeed is a very strong statement. What would that mean really for Puntland?
First of all, to prove that, just the declaration by the federal government might not be enough to prove that this was that sort of act. But what is complicating it is in places like Somalia, that you have a federal government that has some authority, and then you have federal member states that also have de facto authority over their waters. And so I don't think the federal government has any ability or enforcement over the waters around Puntland. In Somalia's national security architecture that was signed a couple of years ago, the Puntland government has authority to, man waters up to 5 or 7 nautical miles, and that is using their coast guard. And then beyond that is the responsibility of the federal government. They're arguing that this was within their territorial waters, and then it's also exposing the fact that the relationship breakdown between the federal government and the federal member states exists, that Puntland did not communicate with the federal authorities when they confirmed that, this could be federal government equipment. So it just shows that there's a breakdown in that relationship, and this is more of a political issue really than really a crisis that is technical or any other sort of crisis.
The ship is said to be headed to a region that's an active conflict zone, and I think you did mention about links to the activities of the Islamic State. So what more can you tell us about that area?
So, Puntland has been, since end of December, been fighting ISIS. This group has really embedded itself in the Puntland mountains, in mountains around Bosaso port. And in this area, Barredo, that was where the ship was idling, was also one of those areas that was under surveillance because the group had been receiving military shipments or fighters through that waterway coming from Yemen into Somalia. So this has always been a zone that has been used for illicit armed trade or all other illicit trade. So it's always an area that has been surveilled by the Puntland administration and other international partners who support Somalia.
And now with these tensions between Puntland and the federal government, how is this likely really to complicate efforts to tackle the issue of terrorism or Islamic militancy activity in parts of Somalia?
It's quite a shame because in terms of terrorism, you're supposed to all work together, the federal government and the federal member states. We have seen Puntland complain that they have not received any support from the federal government. The federal government on its part, especially in south central Somalia, always complains that the federal member states do not support the offensive operations that the federal government conducts. And so this is something that has been happening for quite a while. I think it just complicates how other international partners will be using the waters around Somalia. And I think it just exposes the fact that, yes, the country is not as united as we would want it to seem.
When we're talking about Puntland, it's a semi-autonomous state in Somalia. Just how significant or strategic is this state, in the bigger picture in terms of the governance of the broader Somalia?
In Somalia, you do have, since conflict broke out in 1991, you had the first regional authority that declared complete independence, which is Somaliland. It's completely at the tip, at the north of the country. In 1996, the Puntland state was formed. It was formed as a semi-autonomous region. They never declared independence, but said that they were waiting for the South to stabilize and then join the South in whatever state comes out of it. In the early 2004, it was agreed that Somalia would be a federal government and the first federal member state would be Puntland. So Puntland calls itself the mother of federalism in Somalia and is the oldest federal member state that is actually part of the federal structure. But as old as it is, it has been more secure than the rest of Somalia, but it's also been one that has testy relations with the federal government because of the length of its existence and what it expects in terms of semi-autonomy. Its expectations are quite varied from what leaders in the South consider should be the authority that the federal member state should have.
Samira Gaid, a regional security analyst